There's so many of you all that are involved with students and young people, and those of you that are know what it means to be inspired by young people, and just seeing when they partner with you and are getting involved in meaningful kinds of things, that they can really be inspiring to us. And that's been the joy for me over many years, is to get inspired by young people, and especially when I've had a chance to see them over a long period of time. Before I was the director before I founded Denver Center for International Studies with a group of wonderful teachers, I was the director of a small program at Denver West High School called Center for International Studies, and did that for 21 years. But there were some really powerful young people that were there, and one of them was Maria Trujillo. And she has had a lot of long-standing friendships from that time as well, including Michelle Maldonado is a good friend of hers that have known each other. Now they've known each other for probably 150 years at least. But Maria, I was reminiscing with her this morning because she was part of a team that put together the most impressive International Studies Festival when she was a junior at Center for International Studies. And it filled a gym that was every bit as big as this room with international entertainment, international booths, that was international food, information booths, and crafts, and is still today the model for that kind of an event that we would always want to see in our schools, that our students create and design and then carry out too. So Maria really learned from that she can organize big events. But she really has, but more than that, she developed a real concern for people and for people needs and civil rights and social action and economic empowerment, human rights, poverty alleviation, and social services. Maria went from West High's Center for International Studies to get her BA at Claremont McKenna College and then American University. She got her MA there in International Communications. She was the executive director for United Against Human Trafficking, which was a nonprofit organization in Houston, and has developed this passion for this particular field and how much is needed for all of us to be aware of this and then to support action to hold this back. So now she's Human Trafficking Program Manager at Colorado Department of Public Safety in the Division of Criminal Justice for Colorado. And I'm really proud that she can be with us today. So Maria Trujillo, please come.
I am a lot shorter. All right. I think that's better. So thank you very much for the introduction, Dan, and also welcoming and inviting me to speak with you all this afternoon. It's always a great pleasure to speak in front of such a wonderful audience like the Rotary Club. I've done this several times in my time in Houston, and so it's nice to do that here in my hometown, Colorado. I thought the best place to start off is to kind of talk about my journey and how I came to be so passionate about this issue called human trafficking. And actually, little did I know, it actually started here in Denver, Colorado, as a student at the school, at the Center for International Studies, as Dan mentioned. Our senior year, a group of us was part of this club called the World Affairs Challenge. This was in 1996-97, and we were tasked with a year-long project to research the use of multinational corporations using sweatshop labor in developing countries and how we would want to try to solve that issue and solve that problem. It was before human trafficking was even a term or a concept in anyone's mind, but we did realize what we had was a really egregious problem of exploitation of vulnerable people, and as students, we wanted to try to make a change with that. We actually were a winning team. Our conclusion on how to solve this problem won us first place at the World Affairs Challenge. Michelle was part of that team. We also got first place for most creative. We swept the awards. We were a dynamic team. And I didn't know at the time, back in 1997, that a seed would be planted and that seed would grow and grow throughout the rest of my journey. As Dan mentioned, I went to Claremont and got my bachelor's degree in international relations, had the opportunity to study abroad in Paris and live in Israel for the summer to do research. That then took me to Washington, D.C. and got a master's degree in international communications. And from there, I spent a year living in Japan and spent a lot of time traveling in East and Southeast Asia. And all this time, this idea and the concept of human trafficking and these exploitation that I saw was kind of my soapbox issue. It wasn't something that I studied because there was no mechanism for studying human trafficking at the time. There was no degree around that. You couldn't get a degree or even take a class on human trafficking. But it was my soapbox issue that I would always talk about with friends, and I would fight against buying, Nike shoes and Gap clothes and going to Walmart. But I didn't really know what it all meant. It just was kind of that issue in the back of my mind. And when I lived in Japan and went to places like Cambodia and Thailand and China, I really came face to face with what it looks like on the streets and how pervasive it is in these communities. And when you look at vulnerable populations and the exploitation that's happening right in front of you, I came back from living there wanting to do something, and this came back to Michelle. We were both living in DC, and we both decided she had the opportunity to study something about human trafficking, and she's like, we should do something about that. Like, let's join a club or something. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. Let's give back to our community, because we were instilled with these great value of giving back to our community from CIS and the need to give back and be involved. And so we went on this thing called meetup.com and did a little Google searching and found there was this club called DC Stop Modern Slavery. And we're like, let's go to a meeting. Let's find out what this is all about. And we were hooked. We started just reading as many books as we can about the issue, meeting with those who were involved on the front lines on tackling the issue of human trafficking. And little by little, I found myself being pulled and pulled by this issue more and more, to the point one day that I was like, you know what? I want to do this full time. I want to tackle this issue every day, all day. That's how passionate I am about it. I don't want to just volunteer. We called it our pro bono job because we're doing so much. And I just put it out there, and all of a sudden the cosmos heard me and said, you want to do this full time? Someone called me and said, hey, we're looking for an executive director in Houston to run this anti-trafficking organization. Want to come? I was like, Texas? I don't know. I'm from Colorado. I have a thing about Texas. But I did it. I took this huge leap of faith. They took a huge leap of faith in me. And I ran the United Against Human Trafficking for the last 6 years and did all this awareness raising and training and did a lot of really great work in Houston. And then another moment came where I was ready to come back home and wanted to do this work in my own home state and was ready for another change. And lo and behold, Michelle's like this really key piece in my life. She sent me the job description for the job that I have right now in Colorado. She basically said, it's like you wrote this job description and then asked the Colorado state government to post it for you. It is perfect. It's exactly what you should do. And I took that next leap of faith and applied, and they agreed that it was the right job for me. And now I have this amazing opportunity to shape policy and the issue of how we combat human trafficking here in Colorado in a place that I am so happy to call home. So that's what I'm doing today, and this is part of my job. I get paid to do this, and it's really just an amazing, amazing experience. So from that, I kind of wanted to then tell you a little bit about what we're doing and the issue of human trafficking. I always think it's important to start with the definition. What are we really talking about when we talk about human trafficking? Well, it's the buying and selling of human life. It's the commodification of people. And it's a market-driven criminal enterprise where people are making millions, actually billions of dollars on the backs of human beings. People are being forced, defrauded, or coerced into this issue to provide either labor services or commercial sex. The other thing that's really important to remember when we talk about human trafficking is that we tend to think of it as a verb, right? Trafficking, it's a verb, it means movement. In this particular instance of human trafficking, it doesn't necessarily imply movement. You don't have to be moved across the border or across the state or even across the street to be a victim of trafficking. Really, at the crux of it is the exploitation of a vulnerability and being forced to doing something against your will. And the other big thing that I like to talk about human trafficking is from that human rights perspective. It's a deprivation of someone's human rights that is being done to them against their will. You know, everyone today made the decision to come to this wonderful luncheon. You made that decision. You consciously did that yourself. When you're a victim of human trafficking, those basic decisions of what you're going to do and what you're going to do in your day are taken away from you. Those decisions are made by someone else. There's lots of people everyone wants to know, what are we really talking about? Are we talking about 2 people? Are we talking about 10 people? Are we talking about thousands of people? What is the prevalence of human trafficking? Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. All I could tell you is the best estimate that's out there. The International Labor Organization in 2012 put out a new report that, from my perspective, is the best estimate, and I emphasize estimate, out there around the prevalence of human trafficking. And they estimate that 20.9 people are in forced labor today. And of that, 16.4 million are in labor trafficking, while 4.5 million of people are forced into the sex industry. And I say that because most people actually think it's the reverse, that the vast majority of people are in sex trafficking versus labor trafficking. And through this research and this estimate, it's actually quite the opposite. So I think that's important to point out. The other thing that they put out is an estimate on the global profits of human trafficking. $150 billion is earned in this industry every year. What's interesting also in the breakdown is that $99 billion is earned in sex trafficking, where only $50 billion is earned in labor trafficking, even though the vast majority of people are in labor trafficking. And I think the reason for that is that when labor trafficking is more about a deprivation of wages, whereas within sex trafficking, you're really earning a profit on the product that you're selling. Finally, the number of victims identified globally, which has been hovering around this 45,000 mark every year, really only reflects 0.2% of those in trafficking. So we're doing a pretty lousy job at identifying victims of trafficking. We're not even getting to 1% of the population that is victimized. Finally, the breakdown demographically, adults represent 74% of the victim population, where kids are 26%, and the female-male ratio is actually pretty 50-50. I know a lot of people talk about this issue being a woman's issue or a children's issue, but really, I call it equal opportunity slavery. In Colorado, we're doing actually a pretty good job at tackling this issue. We were kind of doing not a great job earlier. In 2006, we passed the first legislation on human trafficking. We had human trafficking of adults and human trafficking of a child. We were not very successful. We only had 3 convictions using this law in 2006. The legislature realized that and recognized that, and lots of advocates were pushing for changes. And in 2014, they repealed the old law and reenacted new and better laws using the Uniform Code and also truly trying to match our state laws with federal laws. And that happened with HB 141273. This is the new law based on the legislation that passed in 2014 on involuntary servitude. It definitely very much matches the federal definition. We have a Class 3 felony for involuntary servitude of an adult and a Class 2 felony for a minor. So we have a pretty significant hammer when it comes to going after the trafficker. Where labor trafficking is happening in our community, it really could happen anywhere. It could be in our restaurants, in construction, gardening and landscaping, sweatshops, door-to-door sales crews are becoming much more pervasive, peddling and begging rings, domestic servitude within nannies and elder care, and also forced criminality. Recently, we've been hearing stories about Honduran young men being forced to sell heroin on the streets of Denver. So that's something else to take into consideration in thinking about that as a labor trafficking case. Sexual servitude is also on our criminal code books. They broke it out between sexual servitude of an adult and sexual servitude of a minor. And the reason for that is that in our statute, as well as the federal statute, if you are a child under the age of 18 and involved in the commercial sex industry, you should be seen as a victim of a crime and not a perpetrator, and you should not be put behind bars for prostitution or seen as a prostitute. So it's really important that we have this statute in our books. The other thing that they also included on the sexual servitude statute is that it's not a defense if the minor consented, because often minors say that they had. It's not a defense that the defendant knew the age of that minor or had reasonable presumption that it was a minor. That's also really helpful because all the defendants always like, I had no idea how old she was. The minor or another person presented that person as a minor. It's also not a defense if a person does not receive any of the proceeds from the sexual activity. Where sex trafficking is happening in our community, well, we have the umbrella of forced prostitution that could happen in escort services, spa, massage parlors, residential brothels within our neighborhoods, at truck stops, and then street prostitution. We also have exotic dancing. I think there's also a forced criminality element of stealing people's identities during commercial sexual activity and things like that. We also see in arranged marriages. And the other thing that we see that's really big is the use of the internet for forced prostitution, the recruitment of people into prostitution, as well as the making of what they call dates in forced prostitution. Coercion is the big defining element here for this crime and is defined in our statute. Some elements are the use of force or the threat of the use of force, using or threatening the use of laws that are for any other purpose that it wasn't designed. Debt bondage is another form of coercion. So they really helped provide a big umbrella for being able to prove coercion and be able to prosecute this crime. So who are the human traffickers? I would love to come up and show you a picture of what to look for and say, go after these guys. This is what a trafficker looks like. But unfortunately, traffickers are just like any one of us. They're human beings. They go all the way from being really not very organized to being very, very organized. They could be individuals, pimps, someone's neighbor, a family friend, a colleague. It could be more organized with maybe a family business or a larger extended family. It could also be a business, a full business with recruiters and contractors and subcontractors, and also all the way to an international organized crime syndicate. This is just an example of the traffickers that have been prosecuted in our state thus far. There's many more than just what's pictured here. What's really great to see is that our DAs are being very successful. I was just at a sentencing a couple weeks ago where a pimp received 121 years for trafficking a minor. So we're seeing very large sentences here in Colorado, which is a really great sign, and they're being very proactive at going after these traffickers. The one thing I would like to point out is that traffickers are both male and female. There is no gender bias here. Many females are traffickers and are the top of the food chain. They're the big boss. And they could be just as ruthless, if not more ruthless, than male traffickers. So how is Colorado responding to this issue? I would say pretty well. They're sort of late. They were sort of late to the game, but now they're going in full steam ahead. We have an abundance of the last 2 or 3 years. The landscape of the anti-trafficking field has really changed in Colorado. This is just a map of the number of anti-trafficking collaborations that have been established over the last 3 years. They really are covering a lot of the state, so that's a really, really good thing. We're getting community members really wanting to get more involved. We have law enforcement officers working on this issue and developing coalitions and task forces. Here's kind of just a list of the types of organizations that have come together across the state. We need a little bit more like in Durango and some other places, but we're working on that and trying to make this stronger. Now the role of the Colorado Human Trafficking Council. In 2014, with the new laws, they also passed the establishment of a statewide Human Trafficking Council, which is what I'm in charge of kind of coordinating and overseeing. Their mission is to seeking dignity and justice for all trafficked persons in Colorado. It's a 30-member council that was very prescriptive in the legislation on who should be represented on this council. This is just a list of the types of people who are on the council itself. So it's pretty wide-ranging. We have prosecutors, we have community-based advocates, we have law enforcement agencies, we have the representatives from the various coalitions, we have those who work directly with victim services, government agencies like departments of human services. We really also was very important to present the urban perspective versus the rural perspective and have all of those pieces together. This is our mandate as a council is to cover these 8 things. The items in red are the things that we have decided to cover in the 2016 year. As you can see, it's a long list of very big things to tackle, but the council is meeting regularly to work on these issues and really provide a comprehensive, collaborative plan on how to best combat human trafficking in Colorado and for ultimately prevent trafficking happening in Colorado altogether. In 2015, these are the priorities of the council. We're looking at standards and certification for victim services and what that looks like, maybe establishing a grant program for service providers to be able to provide better services to victims of human trafficking. We have a legislative task force looking at safe harbor legislation and how to better protect minors who are victims of sex trafficking. And then we have a task force focused on data collection and looking at and understanding what are the prevalence, what are the gaps in data, and how can we better understand the problem here in Colorado. This is just the structure of the council. We have a lot of people to rally on around the table. We've broken up into these individual task forces. And in the task forces, we don't just have council members, but we sought to seek out subject matter experts from the community to sit on those task forces to help better inform the work that the council's doing. We'll be issuing our first report to the General Assembly on January 1st. My staff is very busy writing, probably as I speak, and putting that report together, and hopefully those findings will help shape legislation for the 2016 session. And this is just briefly, the meetings are always open to the public. They meet once a month. That's my cue to be quiet soon. They're always open to the public. We meet the 4th Friday of every month at 9 a.m. from the Jefferson County Human Services Department. So if you're interested in learning more about what the council does, it's a great place to go. These next upcoming meetings will be very important. And with that, I give you also, before I leave, I never want to fail to give the National Human Trafficking Resource Center a hotline. You are part of a community that can make a difference in bringing an end to human trafficking. If you suspect anything, please call the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. And if you're wanting to look for local resources in the Colorado community, the Colorado Network to End Human Trafficking Hotline is available as well. And so I implore you to be the eyes and ears for us all in identifying human trafficking, because we need to do a much better job. With that, I want to leave it up for any questions before we close.
Thanks for sharing that information, Maria. My question is there any correlation between the number of individuals who are being involved in human trafficking and the number of illegal immigrants that are found in the community? And if so, the services that are being provided, are they being limited to people who are legal residents, or are they available to all residents?
That is a great question. Actually, there was a recent study that took place in California that actually tried to answer that question specifically. And in their research, which this is kind of anecdotal, I've just kind of heard it over the weekend, they found that so they did a survey of trafficking survivors in California that were identified, and they saw that 30% of identified victims of trafficking were of illegal status. And that was just in California alone, so that's kind of a sample, something to consider. That kind of similar study has not been done in Colorado, so I can't answer that for Colorado. But I do think that is certainly a vulnerability, that immigration status is definitely used as a vulnerability and makes someone vulnerable to trafficking. In terms of the service provision, there is a wide range of services that are available to all victims of trafficking. So if you are identified victim of trafficking, you have access to all the services that a legal resident would have, and actually you have a pathway to get legal status in this country through a T visa process that could lead up to actual citizenship. And I actually just met with a survivor recently who just got his green card after being in the United States for the purpose of being trafficked for 9 years. So he's been in the U.S. for 9 years and just got his green card.
In your slide, you mentioned the International Labor Organization. I'd never heard of that organization before. Would that be equivalent to the World Health Organization?
The International Labor Organization is an arm of the UN, so it's a division of the United Nations, and they look at labor issues. So it's, WHO is kind of a separate body from the UN, but similar, yes.
Hello? Okay. So in the news earlier this week, there was reports of the FBI undertaking a massive operation to take down trafficking, particularly of minors. And I noticed in the article that it said that there were folks here in Denver who'd been arrested. And I was wondering what, if anything, you could tell us about that, and if there's anything that we can, or anything that can be done in Denver to help address that situation.
Sure, you're referring to Operation Cross Country 9. It's the 9th year that the FBI has conducted these very organized operations to focus on identifying, detecting sex trafficking of minors, and to arrest the perpetrators of that crime. In my opinion, they could do that kind of operation every single day and probably find 20 minors every day and arrest traffickers. Unfortunately, they don't have the resources to do that every day, but they do this big concerted effort every year to really try to recover minors from this horrible crime and get people behind bars. I don't know too much about, since I haven't met with the council yet and the prosecutors that I know are going to be prosecuting these cases. I suspect that they'll probably be very successful in prosecuting the traffickers. The harder part is working with the victims. Unfortunately, at this time, a lot of those victims are probably sitting in juvenile detention right now. And that's something that I hope to see change over the years. That's one of the reasons is to keep them away from their perpetrator and to keep them safe. And so I appreciate and understand that, and also have them access services that are available through the juvenile detention system. I'm hoping that eventually they'll be transferred into being provided services in more of a child welfare system. So that's something that the council is working on and trying to bring up better services for that community.
Question of trafficking over state lines, and how is that used? Because the mobility, that's been a major thorn in stopping trafficking. Would you address that, please?
Yeah, trafficking across state lines is huge. People are being transported all over the place for the purpose of trafficking. Traffickers often use that as a way to keep someone vulnerable to not get very comfortable in that community, and so they're always dependent on the trafficker. That's why we need to be better about coordinating our efforts across different agencies. That's why the FBI is very heavily involved in this issue, because they have jurisdiction across state lines and can do a better job at that. But that communication between state and local actors and agencies need to be better coordinated to be able to address that, because we're not communicating very well across state lines about the issue. So we could probably be better about going after those traffickers, because they move very fast.
If we do one more up front there.
Beck. What are the various ways that the traffickers control folks that are doing things against their will? You said the dependency just in the last answer, but drugs, fear. How do they keep them where they are and doing what they're doing?
Yeah, so there's kind of three main categories of how you keep someone under the control. One is simple force, so beating, starvation, rape, those isolation, those kinds of things of force. They use force as a way, in my opinion, to break down the humanity of a person, so they feel they have no other choice but to do what the trafficker says. Fraud is the initial way to get someone lured into the situation. That could be either a promise of a better job, a better future, a better life, or a promise of a romantic relationship is one of the big ways through seduction. And then what I call the psychological chains of modern day slavery is through coercion. And I think that's actually the strongest form of control is through manipulation, threats of violence against the person or their family members, lies about what might happen to them if they report their situation to authorities, that you'll just go to jail, that you'll be deported, that no one is here to help you, that I'm the only person that could understand you and provide what you need. And those are really the psychological chains that really keep people involved and in control of their trafficker, very similar to domestic violence. That power and control dynamic is played out in these situations as well.
What a powerful message, Maria. Thank you for joining us today. And here is a card that stipulates that we have inoculated 150 children against polio in your name. And that's also with a match from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. So thank you very much for your very timely and important message. You know, not only did we see in the paper yesterday about the FBI's thing, but this morning there was in the paper the story about the 12-year-old girl that had an internet friendship with a man in Australia, and he showered the mother with thousands, tens of thousands of dollars worth of gifts and flew them both to Hawaii. And she put her 12-year-old daughter in a room with this man from Australia. That's also trafficking. And so it takes a lot of different faces. So thank you for this very important message. You know, we've learned throughout the year about the water work that we've done in Burkina Faso, where we've impacted thousands of lives. We've heard from Sophie about the work that we can be doing in Kenya, impacting more lives. The Muftiks have been doing some tremendous work in Croatia. But in our own backyard, you know, when we saw the graduation of Denver kids, and we see these kids that come from a population with a graduation level of below 50%, but not only are we all graduating them all, but we're also sending them to college. That is your money, your foundation contributions at work. And it is for getting those contributions from you that this dance is being put on. And I urge you to come and get your dancing shoes, have some fun, and come and join us. And if you're a bah humbug kind of person and you don't want to come, write a check and don't come, okay? But come and join us, because it truly is the way that we raise funds to do all this magnificent work around the world. You know, we have a great opportunity. Year to date, our club is down 11 members net, and our year began in August. And so it's a great opportunity for us to fill seats and get friends. Next week, we're going to hear from a Colorado Supreme Justice member on the water rights in Colorado. And what is more important to us than water? Of course, things like our theme of today is also. So our job is to educate ourselves on what is happening in our community. Bring potential members. Bring someone next week that you feel will benefit from a discussion on water rights in Colorado. So join us next week. And with the message that we heard today in the four-way test, keep in mind, you know, is it fair to all concerned with what is happening? Let's make a difference out there. Have a wonderful weekend.